The entire foundation of modern thought once teetered on the edge of being lost. We could have missed the core ideas of Aristotle, the precise geometry of Euclid, and the medical wisdom of Galen forever. This was not a crisis solved by armies or empires, but by a dedicated group of scholars working in quiet rooms from Baghdad to Toledo. This journey will reveal how these translators at the crossroads of knowledge played a singular role in preserving the ancient world, ensuring you understand the true origin of the ideas that built our civilization. How did these texts endure centuries of change, and who were the quiet figures who carried them across languages and faiths? What does it truly take to safeguard an entire world of knowledge from fading away? A world of learning was shrinking. The great libraries that once anchored the Mediterranean world were now quiet, their vast collections of knowledge reduced to fragile manuscripts scattered across a fractured landscape. In Western Europe, the political unity that had supported scholarship was gone, replaced by smaller kingdoms focused on immediate survival. The complex Greek and Latin texts detailing the movements of planets, the principles of geometry, and the inner workings of the human body were no longer being copied. The scribes who could understand them were vanishing. For generations, these priceless works simply waited in monastery storage rooms, vulnerable to damp, fire, and the slow passage of time. The very language they were written in was becoming a mystery. This was not a sudden destruction but a gradual fading, a great forgetting that threatened to erase the intellectual foundation of the ancient world. The flame of classical learning was growing dim, and without intervention it was poised to vanish into the dark. Yet, just as this light seemed ready to go out, a new beacon was being lit far to the east, in the vibrant, thriving heart of a young and ambitious empire. In the bustling capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, a new kind of empire was being built, one founded as much on ideas as on territory. The city of Baghdad itself was a marvel of urban planning, a circular metropolis designed as a center for global trade and culture. At its intellectual heart stood the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. This was no silent repository for scrolls, but a living, breathing engine of scholarship. Think of a university, a research institute, and a massive library all fused into one dynamic hub. Its mission was beautifully simple: to gather all the world's knowledge under one roof. Sponsored directly by the caliphs, most famously Al-Mamun, teams of scholars were dispatched on buying missions to distant lands, from Byzantine Constantinople to the markets of Central Asia. They were not just waiting for knowledge to come to them, they were actively seeking it out, paying its weight in gold for precious Greek manuscripts that were sitting forgotten in European Scriptoria. This was a deliberate, state-funded project to preserve the legacy of the ancient world. Within the House of Wisdom's walls, you would find a remarkable symphony of collaboration. Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars worked side by side, debating in Arabic, Syriac, and Persian. Their primary task was the monumental effort of translation. A single text, like a work by Aristotle, might first be translated from Greek into Syriac by a Christian scholar, and then from Syriac into Arabic by a Muslim linguist. This multi-step, multi-faith process ensured not just a change of language, but a deep, nuanced understanding of the content. They were not simply copying words, they were transferring entire systems of thought, from medicine and astronomy to philosophy and mathematics, into a new and vibrant linguistic vessel. This was the first great crossroads, where the fading light of Greece was caught and magnified into a brilliant new beacon, ensuring these ideas would not just survive, but would soon embark on an even greater journey. Hunain ibn Ishak embodied this new scholarly ideal. a Nestorian Christian physician working at the very heart of the House of Wisdom, his linguistic skill was legendary. He did not simply know Greek, Syriac, and Arabic. He thought in them, moving between these languages with the ease of a master craftsman selecting the perfect tool. His approach to translation was nothing short of revolutionary. Before his time, many translations were stiff and literal, often losing the original meaning. Hunain changed the game entirely. He was a textual detective, tirelessly seeking out multiple, often fragile, manuscripts of the same Greek work. He would then carefully compare them line by line, cross-referencing versions to correct centuries of scribble errors and fill in missing passages. His goal was not to create a simple copy, but to reconstruct the author's original intent, producing a definitive and authoritative version for a new age. This was a painstaking process of restoration, bringing clarity to texts that had been unclear for generations. But he did not stop there. Hunain and his team, which included his own son, would then compose extensive commentaries. These were not mere footnotes, they were deep engagements with the text, explaining complex medical or philosophical concepts, questioning assumptions, and connecting ancient ideas to contemporary thought. He was, in effect, creating a new bridge of understanding, where the knowledge of the past was not just preserved, but actively interpreted and made relevant. He was far from alone in this monumental effort. Thabit ibn Qurra, a brilliant mathematician and astronomer from the Sabian community, took on the dense works of Archimedes and other Greek geometers. He did not just translate their complex theorems, he refined them, correcting astronomical models and pushing the boundaries of mathematics itself. Meanwhile, the philosopher Al-Khwarizmi led a circle of thinkers who grappled with a profound question. How could the logical frameworks of Aristotle and Plato be harmonized with the tenets of Islamic theology? This was not a passive acceptance of Greek thought, but a vibrant, critical dialogue. These scholars saw themselves as part of a continuous chain of knowledge. They were the inheritors of a great tradition, and their sacred duty was to receive it, to test it, to improve upon it, and to pass it on, richer and more complete than they had found it. They understood that to truly preserve knowledge, you must do more than just save it from being lost. You must breathe new life into it. This work required more than linguistic skill. It demanded a form of intellectual alchemy. The Greek manuscripts arriving in Baghdad were filled with concepts that simply did not exist in the Arabic language of the time. Imagine trying to explain the theory of gravity or the idea of a chemical element to someone without the words for them. The scholars at the House of Wisdom faced this challenge on a grand scale. They were not just translators, they were linguistic architects, building an entirely new scientific and philosophical vocabulary from the ground up. For a term like logic, they developed the word mantic, which means speech or reasoning. For physics, the study of nature, they formulated tabi'iyat. These were not random choices, but carefully considered creations designed to capture the precise meaning of the Greek originals. They were forging the very tools needed to conduct advanced scholarship in Arabic. This creative process was especially vital for translating the core works of Aristotle, a thinker whose entire system of logic was built on a precise and technical vocabulary. His collection of works, known as the Organon, which means tool or instrument, laid out the rules for rational investigation. To translate this, scholars had to adapt not just words, but entire Greek logical structures and rhetorical styles into an Arabic framework that could be understood and used by new generations of thinkers. The result was a profound transformation. The essence of Aristotle's ideas remained intact. His methods of deduction and inquiry were preserved with meticulous care. Yet the form was entirely new, reborn in a language that was dynamic, flexible, and ready to carry these ideas forward. This was not a simple transfer of knowledge from one container to another. It was a creative act of interpretation, a fusion of ancient Greek thought with the vibrant intellectual energy of the Abbasid era. The translators ensured these texts were not just preserved as museum pieces, but were actively integrated into a living, breathing culture of learning. They made Aristotle relevant again, not as a relic of a lost past, but as a contemporary voice in a new conversation. This act of linguistic alchemy would prove to be one of the most important gifts to the future, creating the very versions of these texts that would one day spark a revolution in a place the translators had never seen, medieval Europe. This intellectual horizon stretched far beyond the Mediterranean. The scholars in Baghdad were not merely collecting Greek wisdom, they were building a global library, actively seeking out the most advanced knowledge from every direction. Their gaze turned east toward the ancient and sophisticated scholarly traditions of Persia and India. This was not a one-way rescue mission for Greek texts, but a true multi-directional exchange at the world's greatest intellectual crossroads. From the Persian world, they translated not just poetry and epic stories, but immensely practical works on statecraft and agriculture. These were manuals on how to run a vast empire, how to manage intricate irrigation systems, and how to cultivate new crops. This was the applied wisdom of governance, adding a layer of real-world administration to the philosophical and scientific knowledge arriving from Greece. The Crossroads was becoming a fusion of theory and practice, yet the most transformative import may have come from Indian mathematicians. They had developed a numerical system so powerful and elegant that it would ultimately reshape global computation. This system included the revolutionary concept of zero, a symbol for nothing that, paradoxically, made calculating everything infinitely easier. Along with the decimal place value system, this was a conceptual leap that Greek and Roman numerals simply could not achieve. A brilliant scholar named Muhammad ibn Musa Al-Khwarizmi studied these Indian texts deeply. He composed a foundational book on the calculation with Hindu numerals, which systematically explained this new system. His work was so influential that his own name, Al-Khwarizmi, eventually morphed into the word algorithm, and the term algebra comes directly from another of his book titles. He did not just translate the Indian knowledge, he absorbed it, refined it, and built upon it, creating entirely new fields of mathematics in the process. This was the ultimate synthesis: Greek logic and philosophy, Persian practical wisdom, and Indian mathematical genius were all woven together into a single, cohesive body of knowledge, now expressed in the Arabic language. The House of Wisdom became a crucible where these diverse intellectual traditions melted and merged, creating something entirely new, richer, and more powerful than the sum of its parts. This was not a simple act of preservation, it was an act of creation, building a new intellectual toolkit for the world. While the intellectual fires of Baghdad burned bright, their light was already traveling west, carried along trade routes and across deserts. It found a new home on the European continent itself, in the vibrant cities of Islamic Spain, known as Al-Andalus. Under the Umayyad dynasty, the Iberian Peninsula transformed into a breathtaking oasis of learning, a second brilliant crossroads where the accumulated knowledge of the East was not just stored, but actively brought to life. Here, cities like Córdoba and Toledo emerged as rivals to Baghdad, their libraries and universities becoming legendary. This was a society where the scholarly traditions of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian thinkers intertwined, creating a unique intellectual climate. The vast repository of Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge, now translated into Arabic, arrived in these Western cities, ready for its next great transformation. In Córdoba, a philosopher named Ibn Rushd, known in Latin Europe as Averroes, grappled with the works of Aristotle. His mission was to reclaim the original meaning of the Greek master's thought, which he felt had been clouded by later interpretations. He produced a series of profound, line-by-line commentaries that did more than just explain Aristotle's ideas. They systematized and clarified them for a new age. His work was so comprehensive that for centuries in Europe, many scholars simply referred to Aristotle as the philosopher and Averroes as the commentator. How do you engage with a foundational text, not just by reading it, but by questioning it, testing its limits, and making it speak to your own time? This was the dynamic culture of Al-Andalus. Meanwhile, the influence of another giant, Ibn Sina or Avicenna, was already immense. His monumental medical encyclopedia, the Canon of Medicine, brought together the work of Galen and Hippocrates with his own clinical observations and insights. It became the definitive medical textbook, not just in the Islamic world, but eventually across Europe, a standard authority for over 600 years. This was not a static preservation of old books. It was a living, breathing expansion of knowledge. Scholars in Al-Andalus were adding new chapters to the story, making original contributions in astronomy, botany, and philosophy. They were building upon the foundation they had received, creating a vast and enriched repository of translated and original works. This flourishing culture positioned Spain, and specifically the city of Toledo after its shift in governance, as the next critical gateway. The knowledge that had journeyed from Greece to Baghdad and then to Córdoba was now poised for its most pivotal journey yet, a passage into the heart of a Latin Europe that was just beginning to stir from its long intellectual quiet. The door was about to open. The capture of Toledo in 1085 did not signal an end to learning, but a dramatic new beginning. Instead of closing the city's great libraries, the new Christian rulers welcomed all who sought knowledge. This was a moment of profound historical irony, where a military event became the very key that unlocked a treasure chest of wisdom for a continent eager for it. Under the visionary patronage of Archbishop Raymond, the city transformed into Europe's premier gateway to the ancient world. This was the birth of the legendary School of Toledo, not a single building but a vibrant, collaborative movement of scholars. Here, the old boundaries softened. Christian bishops, Jewish savants, and Muslim physicians found common purpose, united by a shared hunger for the learning preserved in Arabic. Their mission was monumental: to translate the entire philosophical and scientific works of the Greeks, along with the brilliant Arabic commentaries, into Latin, the scholarly language of Europe. The process itself was a marvel of efficiency and cooperation. Teams worked in pairs, a method as practical as it was profound. One scholar, often a native Arabic speaker, would read the text aloud, translating it into the local Romance vernacular. His partner, a Latinist, would then listen and immediately render that spoken translation into elegant, written Latin. This was an assembly line for ideas, a knowledge workshop working at a steady and determined pace. The texts that emerged from these writing rooms were not mere copies. They were hybrids carrying the original voice of Aristotle or Ptolemy, but now enriched through centuries of Islamic scholarship and insight. This was the gift of the School of Toledo. It delivered not just the ancient texts, but 1,000 years of conversation about them. From this single city, a river of rediscovered wisdom began to flow north, quenching an intellectual thirst that would soon reshape a civilization. Gerard of Cremona arrived in Toledo and discovered the intellectual treasure he had been seeking, a vast ocean of knowledge held within Arabic books, yet almost entirely unknown in his native Latin Europe. He was a man guided by a singular passion, the search for Ptolemy's Almagest, a masterwork of astronomy that charted the motions of the heavens. Finding only fragments available in Latin, he made a life-changing decision. He would stay in Toledo and learn Arabic not as a casual student but as a master artisan learns a new essential tool. He remained there for the rest of his life, and his output was truly staggering. Gerard and his team translated over 70 major works, a one-man river of understanding flowing north. He gave Europe the complete Almagest, but also the medical wisdom of Al-Khwarizmi and the monumental Canon of Medicine by Ibn Sina, alongside foundational texts on philosophy, mathematics, and optics. He was not merely a translator, he was a conduit, channeling an entire civilization's learning into a new world hungry for its light. He was far from alone in this grand endeavor. Plato of Tivoli dedicated himself to the precise language of the stars and numbers, collaborating with the Jewish scholar Abraham Bar Hiyya to translate pivotal works on astronomy and the groundbreaking Algebra of Al-Khwarizmi. Robert of Ketton, another key figure, took on the complex challenge of translating the Quran, a task motivated not by religious conversion, but by a deep scholarly desire to comprehend the intellectual and spiritual world of the authors whose scientific works they were so eagerly studying. What drove these Christian scholars to spend decades of their lives mastering a foreign language and deciphering such complex texts? It was a thirst for knowledge so profound that it moved effortlessly across the religious and cultural divides of their time. They saw themselves not as part of a Christian project or a Muslim project, but as participants in a universal human project, the pursuit of truth. Their painstaking work in the quiet Scriptoria of Toledo produced the raw materials for a revolution. These newly translated texts, carrying the voices of Aristotle, Euclid, and Ptolemy as interpreted and expanded by centuries of Islamic scholarship, became the essential textbooks for a new institution just beginning to emerge, the European university. The intellectual energy that would define Paris, Oxford, and Bologna was born from the pages of the books these men carried across a linguistic frontier. They provided the very vocabulary for a new age of European thought. This intricate web of translation depended on a unique group of individuals, the polyglot Jewish scholars who navigated the complex linguistic borders of the medieval world. Fluent in Arabic, Hebrew, and the local Romance dialects, they became the essential linchpins, the human bridges connecting the vast Arabic libraries with the Latin-speaking scholars of Europe. In the very same cities where this knowledge was gathered, like Toledo and Naples, these thinkers operated as the crucial intermediaries. A scholar like Abraham ibn Ezra, for instance, dedicated himself to rendering complex works on astronomy and astrology from Arabic into Hebrew, creating a new repository of scientific wisdom for his own community. But the journey did not stop there. In the south of France, the remarkable Ibn Tibbon family, a virtual dynasty of translators, took up the task. They meticulously translated these newly created Hebrew versions of Arabic texts into Latin, the final key that unlocked this knowledge for the universities of Paris and Bologna. Their role was not merely linguistic, it was deeply cultural. They understood the nuances, the subtle philosophical concepts, and the technical terminology in both the source and target languages. This allowed them to do more than just convert words. They transferred meaning with a fidelity that might otherwise have been lost. Think of a complex message passed through two expert interpreters, each one carefully preserving the original intent so that the final recipient hears the idea in its purest form. This multi-stage process from Arabic to Hebrew to Latin ensured that crucial texts on medicine, philosophy, and astronomy made their final, successful leap into the European mainstream. It underscores a profound truth about this entire intellectual rescue mission. This was not the work of one culture or one faith. It was a sprawling, collaborative effort spanning continents and centuries, a chain of knowledge where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars each held a vital link. Without these cultural and linguistic bridges, the river of wisdom flowing north from Toledo would have simply vanished before it could ever reach its destination. These translated texts were now precious cargo, but they still needed a physical vessel to travel through the world. Before the age of mechanical reproduction, every single book was a unique, handmade object. The survival of this rediscovered knowledge depended entirely on the quiet, painstaking work of scribes in monastic and university writing rooms known as Scriptoria. Picture a hushed hall, illuminated only by candlelight or a high window, where the only sounds are the scratching of quills on parchment and the gentle clink of an ink pot. Here, teams of dedicated copyists sat for hours, days, and months, meticulously transcribing each word of Aristotle's logic or Avicenna's medical canon by hand. This was an act of both faith and endurance. A single volume could take a year or more to complete, its pages often adorned with beautiful, intricate initials and diagrams. The process was slow and deliberate, but it was effective. Each finished manuscript was another safeguard against the passage of time, another copy that could be sent to a different library or school, ensuring that if one was lost, others might carry the wisdom forward. This manual network of preservation created chains of copies that slowly spread across the continent, weaving the ancient world's ideas back into the fabric of European thought. This circulation of knowledge found its most powerful engine in the new universities. In the bustling academic hubs of Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, a revolution was taking place. For the first time in centuries, there was an organized, sustained, and hungry demand for these very texts. The curriculum, known as the liberal arts, was being rebuilt around them. Students did not just read about Aristotle, they debated his logic in crowded lecture halls. Medical students learned their craft from the translated pages of Galen and Avicenna. The abstract geometry of Euclid was no longer a forgotten art, but a required subject for understanding the natural world. The universities created a permanent market for ideas, transforming these fragile manuscripts from rare treasures into essential textbooks. The Scriptoria, often attached to the universities themselves, worked tirelessly to meet this demand, producing standardized copies for masters and students alike. This formal adoption into the heart of education was the final step in securing the legacy of the ancient thinkers. Their works were no longer at risk of fading from memory. They were now the foundation of a new European intellectual identity. Then, in the middle of the 15th century, everything changed. The invention of the printing press with movable type did not simply speed up the process of copying. It fundamentally transformed the very nature of knowledge preservation. Johannes Gutenberg's press was the final, decisive lock on the vault. Almost immediately, printers recognized the immense value of the classical and Arabic works that had been so carefully shepherded through the centuries. The same texts that a monastic scribe might spend a year copying could now be reproduced in their hundreds in a matter of weeks. The great printer William Caxton, for instance, published works by Cicero and other classical authors, making them available to a growing literate public. The Gutenberg Bible was his landmark achievement, but the presses soon churned out editions of Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Archimedes. What did this mean for the ancient world? It meant that a single surviving manuscript in a Toledo library could now become 10,000 identical copies, scattered across Europe in a single year. The written word could no longer be erased by a single event, because its physical copies were now too numerous to ever fully disappear. The printing press did not just preserve the ancient world, it made it permanently and irrevocably a part of our own. ensuring that the light rekindled in Baghdad and carried through Toledo would never again grow dim. Aristotle's return to Europe was more than a rediscovery, it was an intellectual earthquake. The arrival of his complete works, translated from Arabic into Latin, did not offer a few new ideas. It presented an entire universe of thought, a fully formed system for understanding everything from the motion of planets to the nature of the soul. For scholars in the rising universities of Paris and Oxford, this was a profound shock. Here was a body of knowledge built not on divine revelation, but on pure logic and observation of the natural world. It was breathtakingly comprehensive and for many deeply unsettling. How could the logical deductions of a philosopher from ancient Greece be reconciled with the truths of Christian faith? This meeting of different traditions between reason and revelation sparked one of the most intense and creative periods in Western thought, the era of Scholasticism. At the heart of this movement was a Dominican friar named Thomas Aquinas. He saw in Aristotle not a threat to be condemned, but a powerful tool to be embraced. Aquinas embarked on a monumental project to bring together the logic of Aristotle with the theology of the Church. His method was the scholastic method, a rigorous process of questioning, debate, and logical resolution. He would pose a difficult question, present the strongest arguments against his own position, and then, using the precise tools of Aristotelian logic, build a careful, reasoned response. In his great work, the Summa Theologica, he applied this method to thousands of questions, from the existence of God to the nature of ethical life. He did not see faith and reason as enemies, but as two different paths leading to the same ultimate truth. Aristotle's concept of a prime mover, an uncaused cause that set the universe in motion, became, in Aquinas's hands, a logical support for the existence of the Christian God. This was not a simple merging of ideas, it was a fundamental restructuring of Christian philosophy itself, built on a foundation provided by Islamic and Jewish scholars who had engaged with these same texts centuries earlier. The impact rippled far beyond theology. Aristotle's works on natural philosophy provided a new framework for investigating the physical world. His ideas on physics, biology, and meteorology, though often incorrect by modern standards, gave medieval scholars a systematic way to ask questions about nature. They now had a shared language of causes, categories, and logical deduction. The university curriculum was completely transformed. The trivium of grammar, rhetoric, and logic was now dominated by Aristotle's Organon, his collected works on logic. The quadrivium, the study of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, was revitalized by his scientific and metaphysical texts. To be an educated person in the 13th century was to be trained in Aristotelian thought. This new framework, this belief that the universe operated according to rational principles that the human mind could uncover, was the essential precondition for all that followed. It established the very idea of a lawful natural world, a concept without which modern science could never have begun. The quiet work of translators in Toledo and Naples had not just saved old books, they had lit the fuse for a revolution in human understanding. The translated pages of the Canon of Medicine did not merely contain information, they brought with them an entirely new way of seeing the human body. For European practitioners, this was a leap from treating symptoms with local remedies to understanding illness as a system governed by identifiable causes. Ibn Sina's masterwork, along with the foundational texts of Galen and Hippocrates, presented a complete medical universe structured around the theory of the four humors. This was not just a theory, but a practical diagnostic framework. A physician could now observe a patient's symptoms from fever to temperament and trace them back to an imbalance in blood, phlegm, yellow bile, or black bile. This systematic approach replaced much of the guesswork and superstition that had dominated earlier healing practices. It gave medicine a logical language and a method. This new knowledge found its most powerful home in the medical school at Salerno, the first of its kind in Europe. Here, these Arabic texts, now rendered into Latin, became the core of a formal curriculum. Students no longer learned solely through apprenticeship and oral tradition. They studied standardized texts that detailed human anatomy, described hundreds of conditions, and cataloged the properties of medicinal substances from across the known world. The Canon of Medicine served as the ultimate textbook, its 5 volumes covering everything from general principles and pharmaceutical compounds to specific treatments for ailments affecting every part of the body. This was a revolution in education, creating a shared base of knowledge for all trained physicians. For the first time in centuries, a doctor in Paris and a doctor in Bologna could be working from the same authoritative source, discussing cases using the same precise terminology. The impact on patient care was profound and direct. The complex pharmacological compendiums introduced an entire new world of remedies. Where a local healer might use a familiar herb, a university-trained physician could now consult detailed lists of compounds, understanding their specific effects and potential interactions. This expanded the European apothecary from a handful of local plants to a global selection of minerals, spices, and complex preparations. Diagnosis became more systematic, moving beyond outward signs to include the patient's pulse, urine, and overall constitution. This was healthcare built on empirical observation, a method deeply influenced by the translated insistence on careful, logical examination. The foundation of modern medicine was being laid, not in a vacuum, but on a bedrock of preserved and enhanced ancient wisdom, a gift from the translators who ensured this vital science would not be lost. This new mathematical vocabulary transformed the very act of calculation. Before the arrival of the translated texts, European scholars struggled with the clunky system of Roman numerals. Try multiplying 784 by 49 using only the letters M, D, C, L, X, V, and I. The process was so laborious that it often required a physical counting board and pebbles to track each step. The Hindu-Arabic numeral system, championed by scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, changed everything. It introduced the concept of place value, where the position of a digit determines its worth, and the revolutionary symbol for zero, a placeholder that gave meaning to the empty columns. Suddenly, complex multiplication and long division became feasible on paper. This was not just a new set of symbols, it was a new way of thinking about quantity itself, a liberation of the mind from cumbersome mechanical counting. It was the essential upgrade that made all other advanced mathematics possible. At the heart of this new toolkit was Al-Khwarizmi's own monumental work, Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing. Its title gave the world a new word, algebra. The book was a practical guide to solving everyday problems of inheritance, land division, and trade, but its method was its true genius. Al-Khwarizmi presented a systematic way to solve equations, a step-by-step procedure for restoring balance. He taught how to simplify an equation by adding the same quantity to both sides, and how to balance it by subtracting equals from equals. For the first time, complex problems could be broken down into a reliable, repeatable process. This was the birth of a powerful new language for describing relationships between unknown quantities, a language that would one day be used to chart the orbits of planets. This algebraic power was paired with a renewed mastery of shape and space. The works of Euclid, preserved in full and translated from Arabic into Latin, provided an unshakable logical foundation for geometry. His Elements was more than a book of theorems. It was a towering monument to deductive reasoning, proving each new statement from a set of simple, self-evident axioms. For medieval architects and masons, this was the theoretical key to building soaring cathedrals with their vast stone vaults and precise symmetry. Meanwhile, the sophisticated trigonometry developed by Indian and Arab astronomers gave scholars the tools to measure what they could not touch. Functions like the sine and cosine, translated and refined in works like the Zij al-Sindhind, allowed for the indirect calculation of distances. An astronomer could now determine the height of a tower or the diameter of the Earth by measuring angles alone. This fusion of algebra, geometry, and trigonometry created an unprecedented mathematical engine. It enabled the precise design of optical lenses for the first telescopes, the accurate charting of celestial movements for navigation, and the complex structural calculations for ever more ambitious buildings. The ancient world's mathematical prowess, carefully preserved and significantly enhanced, was no longer a collection of abstract ideas. It was now a practical, powerful instrument, placed firmly in the hands of European thinkers and poised to unlock the secrets of the physical universe. Ptolemy's vision of the universe arrived in Europe not as a fragile artifact, but as a vibrant and living system. His great work, the Almagest, mapped the heavens with a geometric precision that left medieval scholars in awe. It presented a cosmos of perfect, interlocking crystalline spheres, with our world resting peacefully at the center. This was far more than a simple theory. It was a sophisticated mathematical engine capable of predicting the positions of the sun, the moon, and the wandering planets with remarkable accuracy for its time. Yet the version that reached the universities of Paris and Oxford was far richer than Ptolemy's original text. Tucked into the margins and woven throughout supplementary writings were the insightful notes and thoughtful corrections of generations of Islamic astronomers. These dedicated scholars had spent centuries observing the night sky, and they noticed small but persistent differences between Ptolemy's predictions and what they actually witnessed. A planet might appear just a little ahead of or behind its expected position. These were not simple errors to dismiss, but intriguing puzzles waiting to be understood. Astronomers like Al-Battani carefully refined Ptolemy's measurements of the solar year, while others proposed subtle refinements to the model's intricate components, its epicycles and equants, to better align with the observed celestial motions. The translated texts carried this entire legacy of thoughtful engagement, offering European scholars not a closed doctrine, but a dynamic and ongoing scientific dialogue. This conversation was supported by vastly improved tools. The translators brought with them a powerful new form of astronomical literature, the Zij. These were not merely simple star charts, but comprehensive handbooks that blended Ptolemaic theory with enormous collections of fresh observational data. A typical Zij contained detailed tables for calculating planetary positions, calendars for marking important dates, and guidance for timekeeping and navigation. They were the essential software operating on the framework of Ptolemy's cosmic model. The Toledan tables, compiled in Al-Andalus and later translated into Latin, became the standard reference for European astronomers for hundreds of years. Imagine a ship's captain navigating by the stars, or a monk determining the correct date for a major observance. Their work relied completely on the reliability of these tables, a reliability honed in the observatories of the Middle East and delivered through the diligent work of translators. This created a fascinating paradox. The very instruments that refined the geocentric model, the precise tables and sharp observational records, were what eventually uncovered its most profound limitations. As measurements grew more exact, the small imperfections in Ptolemy's system became increasingly difficult to reconcile with additional cosmic adjustments. The model was becoming cumbersome, a beautiful yet overly intricate machine. This growing tension between an elegant theory and persistent data set the stage for a profound shift. When Nicolaus Copernicus began his own work, he had access to this complete, enriched tradition. He studied the same Arabic commentaries that questioned Ptolemy's mechanisms, and he depended on the observational data preserved in the translated Zij tables. The intellectual foundation laid by centuries of Islamic scholarship provided him not only with the mathematical language to shape his own theory, but also with the critical evidence that the old model was faltering. The detailed cosmos preserved by the translators became the very material used to reconsider its Earth-centered premise. The act of preservation did not halt knowledge in its tracks, it kept it in flow, ensuring that ancient questions about our place in the cosmos would continue to be explored with ever greater clarity until the answers themselves began to transform. The survival of entire fields of knowledge often depended on a single fragile manuscript. Consider the brilliant mind of Archimedes, a thinker who calculated the value of pi and grasped the principles of buoyancy. His most advanced works on geometry and calculus, exploring concepts that would not be fully rediscovered for over 1,000 years, traveled a path of breathtaking fragility. The sole surviving Greek copy of these texts was eventually washed clean and written over in the Middle Ages, a common practice when parchment was scarce. That unique manuscript, a palimpsest where the original writing lay hidden beneath a later religious text, was itself later translated into Arabic. For centuries, the Arabic version was the primary vessel carrying Archimedes' most revolutionary ideas. Without that crucial translation, his profound insights into infinity and the mathematics of shapes might have been lost to history forever. A similar story unfolds in the world of medicine. The works of Galen, the Greek physician whose theories shaped Western medicine for over a millennium, faced a similar near disappearance. While his name remained famous, many of his actual texts vanished from the European tradition. The Greek originals were simply gone, yet his comprehensive system of anatomy and treatment survived intact, preserved and expanded within the libraries of the Islamic world. Scholars like Hunain ibn Ishak meticulously translated Galen's vast body of work into Arabic, ensuring that his detailed observations on the nervous system, his theories of pulse diagnosis, and his complex pharmacological knowledge were not just saved, but actively studied and refined. For generations, the only complete Galenic corpus available to anyone in the world existed in Arabic. This created a profound historical echo during the European Renaissance. As scholars looked back to the classical past, they sought to recover the pure Greek sources. In a powerful twist, they often found that the only surviving copies of these very Greek texts were not in Greece at all, but in the Arabic translations held in places like Toledo or the libraries of Italian merchants. The recovery of lost classical wisdom therefore required a second great translation movement, this time from Arabic back into Latin and Greek. A Renaissance scholar seeking the complete Archimedes or the full Galen would first have to locate an Arabic copy, then work with a translator to bring those ideas full circle. This journey from Greek to Arabic and back again stands as the ultimate testimony to the success of the medieval preservation project. It proves that the translators did not merely delay the loss of these texts, they actively rescued them from the edge of being forgotten, handing them back to a future that was finally ready to receive them. Each translator faced a stark reality the moment a fragile manuscript was unrolled. The text itself was often a puzzle, its ink faded, its pages touched by time or handling, and its words sometimes copied differently by scribes generations earlier. This was not a clean academic exercise, it was a form of textual archaeology. A single Greek term could be completely unknown, its meaning quiet for centuries. In response, these scholars developed a sophisticated professional toolkit, the collaborative model perfected in Toledo, with one scholar interpreting the Arabic aloud into a common spoken language while a partner rendered it into formal written Latin, was a stroke of genius. It combined the deep linguistic knowledge of a native speaker with the literary skill of a master writer, creating a powerful assembly line for ideas. To manage the constant challenge of obscure terminology, they created the first bilingual glossaries, carefully listing difficult Arabic scientific terms alongside their Latin equivalents. These were the early dictionaries of knowledge, designed to bring consistency and clarity to a monumental task, yet their greatest challenges were not linguistic but ethical. They wrestled with a question that still faces every translator today. Should they produce a word-for-word, literal translation that might be awkward and unclear, or should they strive to capture the true spirit and meaning of the text, even if it required some thoughtful liberty? The best translators, like Gerard of Cremona, almost always chose meaning over literalness. They understood their duty was not to the individual words, but to the ideas those words conveyed. This led to another profound dilemma. How should they handle passages in a philosophical or scientific work that seemed at odds with the core tenets of their own worldview? A Christian translator rendering an Arabic text might encounter a statement about the eternal nature of the world that differed from the concept of divine creation. Their solution was both practical and brilliant. Instead of altering the original text to fit their beliefs, they would add their own voice to the conversation through a commentary. They would translate the challenging passage faithfully and then, in a separate note, explain the different perspective. They might write, as the author states here, but the Christian faith teaches us this. This practice preserved the integrity of the source material while allowing the translator to place it within their own intellectual and spiritual framework. It turned the translated book into a living dialogue across time and culture, with the original author's voice and the translator's reflections standing side by side. This commitment to fidelity, paired with a drive for clarity, established a precedent that would define the very art of translation for centuries to come. Their work was not a simple mechanical transfer, but a deeply thoughtful act of cultural bridge building, one that demanded as much philosophical wisdom as it did linguistic skill. The quiet scratching of pens in translation rooms was a sound funded by empires. Without the deep treasuries of caliphs and kings, the great rescue of ancient knowledge would have stalled before it ever begun. This monumental work required more than brilliant minds. It required patrons who understood that knowledge itself was a form of power. In Baghdad, the Abbasid Caliph Al-Ma'mun did not merely approve of the House of Wisdom, he was its driving force. His patronage was rooted in the central Islamic value of ilm, the relentless pursuit of knowledge as a spiritual and practical duty. He sent emissaries with generous funding, instructing them to acquire Greek manuscripts at any price, offering generous compensation in precious metals. This was not a casual hobby for the court. It was a state-sponsored project on an industrial scale, designed to make the Abbasid Caliphate the intellectual center of the world. The scholars in the House of Wisdom received regular salaries, freeing them from any concern for their daily needs and allowing them to focus entirely on the slow, meticulous work of translation and commentary. Their labor was seen as a public good, an investment in the empire's future prestige and capability. Centuries later and thousands of miles to the west, this same understanding animated Archbishop Raymond of Toledo. After the city's shift in governance, he could have dismantled its rich intellectual culture. Instead, he chose to harness it. He actively recruited the finest linguistic minds from across the Mediterranean, offering them protection, resources, and a shared mission. He funded the collaborative teams that became the School of Toledo, understanding that this influx of Arabic knowledge would elevate the entire cultural and intellectual standing of his domain. His patronage was a strategic masterstroke, transforming a newly conquered city into Europe's premier gateway to wisdom. Later, King Alfonso X of Castile took this vision even further. His court became a dazzling workshop of scholarship, where he personally oversaw the translation of works on astronomy, law, and games. He understood that this accumulated knowledge was the ultimate strategic resource, a tool for better governance, more accurate calendars, and a more sophisticated understanding of the natural world. Why would a king spend his treasury on translating old books? Because he recognized that the true wealth of a kingdom was not just in its land or its armies, but in the depth of its learning. This pattern reveals a profound truth about the journey of ideas. The preservation of knowledge has always been tied to structures of power and wealth. It required individuals in positions of immense authority who could see beyond immediate political or military concerns to fund a project whose full impact they would never live to see. They provided the stable ground in which the seeds of ancient thought, carried by scholars and translators, could take root and grow. The timeless ideas of Aristotle and Galen survived not just on parchment, but on the strength of a caliph's decree or a king's generous patronage. This river of recovered knowledge did not simply flow into the libraries of Europe. It overflowed, saturating the very soil from which a new age would grow. The Renaissance, that spectacular explosion of art and intellect, was not a sudden miracle. It was a direct and logical outcome of the vast collection of ancient texts that had been so carefully carried across languages and centuries. For the first time, humanist scholars in Florence and Rome held in their hands a nearly complete picture of classical antiquity. They were no longer admiring fragments through a distant haze. They were reading the full, vibrant voices of Plato, Aristotle, and Vitruvius. This was not just information, it was an invitation to a grand conversation. Armed with these texts, they sought not merely to copy the past, but to emulate its spirit of inquiry and its pursuit of beauty, to build a world that rivaled the one they had rediscovered. We can see this transformation etched in stone. The magnificent dome of the Florence Cathedral, engineered by Filippo Brunelleschi, stands as a literal embodiment of this revived knowledge. For decades, the great opening in the cathedral's roof had seemed an impossible challenge, a span too wide for any known medieval technique. Brunelleschi's genius lay in his deep study of Roman architecture, principles preserved in texts and physically evident in the ruins he meticulously studied. He understood the physics of the Roman arch and the strength of a double-shelled structure, applying ancient engineering solutions to a contemporary problem. His dome was not a replica, but a brilliant application of recovered wisdom, proving that the classical world still had powerful lessons to teach. At the same time, a philosophical revolution was unfolding. The recovery of Platonic dialogues, which had been largely unknown in the Latin West, ignited the intellectual life of Florence. Under the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici, Marsilio Ficino established the Platonic Academy, dedicating his life to translating the entire works of Plato directly from Greek into Latin. This was a pivotal shift, a move beyond the Arabic-mediated Aristotle that had dominated medieval thought. Plato's focus on ideal forms, the lasting nature of the spirit, and the pursuit of transcendent beauty resonated deeply with Renaissance humanists. It offered a new way to reconcile the physical world with the divine, inspiring artists to see their work not as mere craft, but as an attempt to capture eternal truths. The ripple effect was everywhere. Sculptors like Donatello studied classical statues to understand human anatomy and contrapposto, bringing a lifelike dynamism back to the human form that had been absent for 1,000 years. The very concept of the Renaissance individual, the uomo universale capable of genius in both art and science, was a direct echo of the classical ideal, made visible again through the pages of preserved texts. This great rebirth was the final, glorious destination for the knowledge that had been rescued from the edge of being lost, a vibrant testament to the translators who ensured these seeds would one day find fertile ground. Yet the true legacy of this preservation was not locked within university walls. These recovered ideas slowly seeped out of scholarly circles, beginning a quiet revolution in the daily lives of ordinary people. The sophisticated knowledge that had traveled from Greece to Baghdad and then to Toledo began to transform the very landscape of Europe. Translated manuals on agriculture, for instance, introduced more efficient crop rotation methods and new irrigation techniques learned from Persian texts. This was not an abstract theory. It was practical wisdom that could mean the difference between a successful harvest and hardship for an entire village. A farmer might never read the original Arabic book, but his fields would benefit from the organized, systematic approach to cultivation that these texts championed. The impact was just as profound in the towns. The same geometric principles that allowed scholars to understand Euclid gave master builders the mathematical confidence to engineer the Gothic arch. This architectural leap was not merely an aesthetic choice, it was a structural revolution enabled by preserved knowledge. The soaring cathedrals that came to define the European skyline were physical monuments to the logical precision of the ancient world, now made accessible to all through the power of translation. Public health also saw gradual improvement as core medical concepts from the canon of medicine filtered down. While most people would never see the Latin text, the humoral theory of balancing the body's fluids influenced the diets they were recommended and the remedies available from local healers. The idea that illness had identifiable natural causes, rather than being purely a matter of fate or divine will, began to take root in the popular imagination, slowly changing how communities cared for their sick. This trickle-down of knowledge was dramatically accelerated by a pivotal technological import, paper. Brought from China through the Islamic world, paper provided a far cheaper and more abundant writing surface than fragile parchment or expensive vellum. Suddenly, books and pamphlets did not have to be rare treasures owned only by princes and bishops. They could be produced in greater numbers, making written information more accessible than ever before. This shift coincided with a growing desire to read and write in local vernacular languages like English, Italian, and French, rather than solely in Latin. Writers began translating not just scientific works, but stories and practical guides into the languages people actually spoke. What does it mean for a society when a merchant can read a ledger, a craftsperson can study a building guide, or a curious individual can explore a translated text on their own? It means that knowledge is ceasing to be a sacred flame guarded by a privileged few and is becoming a shared resource. This slow but steady opening of information was transforming the intellectual soil of Europe, creating a broader, more scientifically curious populace. The patient work of the translators had not just saved ideas for the elite, it had planted seeds that would eventually bloom in the minds of everyone. This idea of a dark age collapses under the weight of the evidence. The story of the translators reveals a world far more complex and connected than the old narrative allows. While Western Europe was indeed rebuilding its political and intellectual foundations, a brilliant constellation of learning shone brightly elsewhere. To call this entire era a dark void is to ignore the luminous centers of Baghdad, Córdoba, and Constantinople, where the flame of inquiry burned with extraordinary intensity. The thread of intellectual progress was never truly broken. It was simply being woven on a different global loom. This was not an age of universal darkness, but a period of deliberate cultural exchange and preservation happening across continents. The so-called Dark Ages were, in reality, a time when the collective knowledge of humanity was being carefully gathered, sorted, and translated, ensuring its survival for a future that would one day be ready to use it. This reframes the entire period from a story of absence to one of guardianship. The quiet work happening in translation rooms from the Middle East to Spain was the essential bridge, a continuous thread of light connecting the ancient world to the modern. It reminds us that progress is rarely a single, linear story happening in one place, but a tapestry of interconnected efforts, often unfolding just beyond the horizon of our traditional view. What other stories have we missed by focusing only on one part of the map? This synthesized knowledge fundamentally reshaped the European mind. When a scholar like Albertus Magnus lectured at the University of Paris, he was not simply explaining Aristotle. He was presenting a rich tapestry woven from many threads. He would lay out an Aristotelian principle of nature, then enhance it with an optical insight from the Arabic scientist Al-Khwarizmi, and perhaps temper it with a botanical observation from his own fieldwork. His monumental work on animals, for instance, drew directly from Aristotle's original classifications, but it was filled out with details and corrections from Arabic translations and his own direct observation. He was not a passive receiver of a single tradition, but an active participant in a global conversation, using every tool available to him to build a more complete picture of the natural world. His most famous student, Roger Bacon, took this synthetic approach even further. Bacon argued passionately that to truly understand the world, one needed three sources of authority. The first was logical argument, the rigorous framework inherited from the Greeks. The second was the accumulated experimental knowledge preserved and expanded by Arabic scholars. But the third, and for Bacon the most crucial, was personal, verifiable experience. He championed what he called the science of experiment. This was the final, vital ingredient added to the mix. It was the insistence that even the most elegant theory must be tested against the physical world. His own groundbreaking work in optics, which laid the foundation for the invention of eyeglasses and later the telescope, was only possible because he combined Greek geometry with the detailed experimental data recorded by Al-Khwarizmi. The crossroads of knowledge did not merely pass a baton, it created a new kind of runner. The intellectual culture that emerged was a hybrid, stronger and more adaptable than any of its parent traditions. It possessed the logical backbone of Greece, the meticulous observational records of the Islamic world, and a newfound commitment to empirical testing. This was not a simple return to the classics, but the birth of a new methodology. The legacy of the translators was this powerful fusion, a toolkit that equipped Europe not to rediscover the past, but to ultimately move beyond it. This ancient drive to preserve knowledge echoes powerfully in our own time. We are living through another great translation movement, not of languages, but of formats, as we race to save our digital heritage from a new kind of decay. The medieval House of Wisdom, a centralized hub for gathering the world's manuscripts, finds its modern counterpart in projects like the Internet Archive, a global digital library working to prevent a different dark age. Their mission is remarkably familiar: to combat the fragility of information. Where ancient scribes worried about fire and damp, digital archivists now face challenges like link rot, format obsolescence, and the quiet disappearance of websites that slip from view. The core concern is the same: the profound cultural shift that happens when a generation's knowledge, its art, its news, its very conversations simply fade from memory. Both eras operate on a shared belief that this collective wisdom is a common human inheritance, too precious to be left to chance. The challenges they face are also parallel in scale and complexity. Just as the scholars in Baghdad had to verify the accuracy of every copied Greek manuscript, correcting centuries of scribble errors, digital archivists must ensure the fidelity of their copies. A single corrupted file can be as lost as a text scrubbed clean, and the sheer volume of information is staggering. The House of Wisdom sought to gather all the world's knowledge, a monumental task in its day. Today, the Internet Archive has preserved hundreds of billions of web pages and millions of books, a quantity that would have been unimaginable to a medieval translator, yet the fundamental goal of comprehensive preservation remains unchanged. Then there is the challenge of access. The medieval translators broke down barriers by moving texts from Greek and Syriac into Arabic and later Latin. Today's digital archivists are building tools for machine translation and universal access, striving to make this vast repository understandable across the globe's many languages. They are the new guardians at the crossroads, ensuring that our digital present remains a lasting gift to the future. This enduring mission proves that the work of the translator is a perpetual human concern, a quiet but essential thread that connects us across the centuries, reminding us that to safeguard knowledge is to safeguard our very civilization. The true scale of this rescue mission rests upon a foundation of quiet, anonymous work. For every celebrated name like Gerard of Cremona, there existed a small army of copyists, librarians, and financial supporters whose collective labor turned fragile manuscripts into a permanent inheritance. These individuals spent their lives in dimly lit rooms, their hands tracing the curves of unfamiliar letters, their minds focused on the meticulous task of preservation. They were not driven by the promise of fame, for most would never see their names recorded in a historical chronicle. Their reward was more profound, a deep and abiding love for wisdom itself, a philosophy that saw this work as a sacred duty to those not yet born. A single translation project could consume a decade of a team's life, a lifetime's dedication poured into ensuring that a single idea from Aristotle or a medical insight from Galen could journey safely into the future. We must remember them not as passive scribes but as active, thinking participants in this grand project. Each time a translator encountered a difficult passage, they faced a choice. Which word best captures the original author's intent? How should this complex philosophical concept be rendered for a new audience? These were not mechanical decisions, but deeply intellectual ones, requiring a critical engagement with the text. They were, in effect, the first editors and interpreters of the ancient world, making conscious choices about what to emphasize, what to clarify, and how to frame these old ideas for a new cultural context. In doing so, they did not just save knowledge, they subtly shaped it, leaving their own invisible imprint on every line. Their legacy is the intellectual air we breathe today, the very foundation of our modern world built from the choices they made with their pens, one careful word at a time. The story of the translators is a profound testament to human curiosity and resilience. It shows us that ideas are the most durable currency of civilization, outlasting empires and surviving the slow erosion of time. From the bustling scriptoriums of Baghdad to the scholarly collaborations of Toledo, these intellectual crossroads ensured that the flame of knowledge was never extinguished. Instead, it was carefully carried forward, growing brighter with each new generation of guardians who added their own fuel to its fire. This was not a passive act of storage, but an active, continuous process of engagement. The ancient texts were not locked away in vaults. They were read, debated, corrected, and built upon. Each translation was a conversation with the past, ensuring that these foundational ideas remained vibrant and relevant. They understood that knowledge is not a static monument, but a living river that requires constant care to keep its waters flowing into the future. As we navigate our own information-saturated age, with its unique challenges of digital decay and overwhelming noise, we can draw immense inspiration from their example. Their legacy reminds us of the enduring value of preserving, understanding, and building upon the wisdom of the past. It calls on us to be mindful curators of our own collective knowledge, to seek out the essential signals amidst the chaos, and to ensure that the most valuable parts of our own culture are passed on. If this journey through the crossroads of knowledge has sparked your curiosity, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden histories that shape our world, subscribing is a wonderful way to ensure you do not miss the next discovery.